Thank you very much, Lee. And just a quick preamble before I get to my prepared remarks. And Larry, you mentioned the generic industry, and I think you identified a lot of the problems, some of the challenges we have around margins, as well as the issue of sort of the supply chain and visibility into that. But I think, and I'd love to have this conversation, is what I'll be presenting in my remarks is actually some of the resiliency that is built into the system, even though we have some of the challenges you identified. So just wanted to put that bookmark there because I thought you raised an important point, but we as an industry come to a different conclusion. So, but maybe with that preamble over, I will start. So good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Kimball, and I'm the Vice President for Trade and International Affairs for the Association for Accessible Medicine. We are the trade association that represents the generic and biosimilar manufacturers in America. I would like to thank the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine for holding this important discussion. In the early days of COVID, strong concerns were voiced about the susceptibility of the US healthcare system to drug shortages due to the global nature of the US supply chain. Industry critics, members of Congress, and even senior FDA officials were all expressing concerns about likely supply disruptions. And while the global nature of the supply chain is very much true, the major disruptions that were warned against have not come to pass. When global transportation slowed in March and April 2021, some short-term supply disruptions did arise. However, based on analysis of IQVIA data, those disruptions were resolved by the end of April into early May, and the supply chain has, for the vast majority of products, performed exceptionally well since. And the reason those disruptions were minimal was because the generic industry had experienced supply disruptions in the past, and companies had contingency plans in place to address those disruptions if they emerged. From the conversations I've had with our members, the generics industry did not, and clearly isn't going forward, operate on a just-in-time principle, as was discussed earlier. But they actually held stocks and a substantial amount of stock for months of production in hand, just in case this type of supply disruption did emerge. It's also important to note that the generics and biosimilar industry already plays an important role in US manufacturing. Our 23 member companies alone manufacture more than 60 billion doses in the US each year, employing more than 52,000 employees at 149 manufacturing plants across the country. And generic medicines play an integral role in healthcare and enhance patient access to life-saving treatments. The expiration or invalidation of patents and the resulting introduction of multiple generic and biosimilar manufacturers competing against each other, often other on price, result in savings for patients and the healthcare system. Over the last 10 years, manufacturers of generic medicines have delivered savings of more than $2 trillion, including $330 billion in 2020, to patients in the US healthcare system. As part of the industry's ongoing commitment for patient access, AAM released a 7-element framework that lays out concrete actions to ensure US patients and the US healthcare system have access to a secure and consistent supply of critical medicines. AAM's blueprint builds upon the existing generics manufacturing base, that I highlighted earlier. Creating the conditions that support and encourage this investment is necessary to ensure that the most critical medicines, those most essential to our country's health and security, are manufactured in the US. In order to establish this environment, AAM's blueprint recommends the following. Review and update at regular intervals the list of essential medicines, which was first released by the FDA in October 2020. Provide new grant and tax incentives to support increased US manufacturing of essential medicines. Supply the Strategic National Stockpile, the US Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Department of Defense with essential medicines on a long-term basis with guaranteed price and volume contracts. Leverage the Medicare and Medicaid programs to encourage domestic production of essential medicines. Reduce regulatory inefficiencies to streamline the federal approval of US-based facilities to manufacture medicines. And finally, to promote a global cooperative approach diversifying the supply chain through the conclusion of the International Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Agreement. This is actually, I think, can maybe answer one of the questions, Lee, that you posed to begin the last conversation. Is there an agreement that could be in place to promote this type of resiliency in the supply chain? And I'll go into more detail about this proposal in a moment. Our blueprint, the AAM blueprint, includes actionable short-term steps to expedite more US-based production of essential medicines while putting in place a series of incentives to enhance the security of the US pharmaceutical supply chain. Given that modern manufacturing facilities can take 5 to 7 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build, a long-term consistent commitment from the federal government is critical to building an expanded generic manufacturing base in the United States. Now, I'll spend the rest of my conversation speaking about trade and the supply chain. So prior to the COVID pandemic, trade in pharmaceuticals was very efficient. Thanks to the WTO 0 for 0 pharmaceutical agreement, most finished dosage and APIs faced little or no tariffs in most major markets. As a result of this free trade environment, the supply chain became very global. This was especially true for the generic industry, where prices were driven extremely low due to high levels of competition in the United States, the largest pharmaceutical market in the world. To stay competitive in this market, companies had to find cost savings through innovation and low-cost inputs. Those market dynamics, combined with the fact that the key starting materials and sources of API were often found in lower wage markets, resulted in an expansion of the production footprint from being predominantly in the US and Europe to being much more diverse, with China and especially India developing important domestic manufacturing capabilities. Today, the global generic manufacturing base touches all parts of the globe, from Europe to India, from Canada and Mexico to China and Vietnam. And yes, here in the US too. As I noted earlier, those 60 billion doses are made here in the United States each year by American workers employed across the country. But the focus of the COVID pandemic on the pharmaceutical supply chain makes it clear that more should be done to promote a resilient and redundant global supply chain and more manufacturing here in the United States. In the Biden administration's 100-day assessment of the US pharmaceutical supply chain, it was suggested that ensuring the resilience of our ally supply chain was in the US's best interest. I fully agree with this, because the US can't alone produce all the medicines our patients need. We are most secure when the globally diverse supply chain is functioning well. From the viewpoint of AM, that can best be accomplished through a renewed commitment by the US and our allies to promote free, unfettered trade in pharmaceuticals. Our proposed international pharmaceutical supply chain agreement does just that. We believe the US should lead the negotiation of a plurilateral agreement with its allies to renew a commitment to tariff-free trade in pharmaceuticals and AP, and to forego export bans on finished dosage and API in times of political upheaval, pandemics, or natural disasters. This agreement can help promote regulatory harmonization and more efficient trade facilitation, access to procurement markets, while also allowing countries to undertake programs that promote domestic manufacturing. We believe that this agreement can promote greater cooperation, coordination, and partnership between the United States and its allies that will be highly valuable in the face of the next global pandemic. But to get there, we need the US government to move this concept forward. There has been a lot of discussion about the need to secure the US pharmaceutical supply chain. And it is very welcome that there is now a bipartisan recognition that it must be done in concert with our allies. This agreement can serve as the framework to actualizing that goal, and we encourage negotiations to be started as soon as possible. The global nature of our supply chain provides us the resiliency that is so important to ensuring American patients have access to the medicines they need. Trade policy can be a tool to ensure that the benefits of this free trade regime continue, and that the US, in partner with our allies, is better positioned to ensure that whatever medicines are needed during the next pandemic, they are readily available. AM's proposal for the international pharmaceutical supply chain, if enacted, can contribute to that goal. Thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing this further.